For a large portion of the Southern Command community, the U.S. attack on the Panamanian Defense Forces and Noriega began here, in this studio, sometime around 12:30 the morning of December 20th. This is a Southcom special announcement. Once again, this is a Southcom special announcement. The command is currently at PML Echo. All personnel should stay in place. Because of recent actions by the Noriega regime, the President of the United States has ordered military action against the Panama Defense Forces. The purpose of this action is to ensure the protection of U.S. personnel and U.S. facilities and guarantee the future safe operation of the Panama Canal. There is fighting throughout Panama, and all personnel should remain at home, remain in place. All U.S. schools are closed until further notice, and all movement except by U.S. military forces is prohibited. Whether you live on a U.S. defense site or in any area of Panama, stay off the streets, stay away from doors and windows, ensure you and your children do not go outside, and do not interfere with any U.S. maneuvers. These operations are not directed against the people of Panama, but rather Noriega, who has been indicted in the U.S. on drug trafficking charges, and the Panama Defense Forces, who are responsible for continued harassment and even the murder of a U.S. military officer. PML Echo is in effect. There is a threat to the lives of U.S. personnel. If you live on a defense site or military area of coordination, stay there. Travel to or through any area not on a defense site or military area of coordination is not authorized except for U.S. military forces. All exchanges, commissaries, etc. are closed until further notice. Limit your use of the telephone to emergency calls only. Hospital emergency rooms only are open. All other routine clinic appointments are canceled. Again, we are currently in PML Echo. Stay tuned to SCN Radio and Television for further advisories. This has been a Southcom special announcement. As mentioned in that early morning broadcast, it was the security of the canal and U.S. personnel that led the U.S. to take action here. The U.S. ability to provide that security was threatened by a sequence of actions taken or instigated by the dictator Manuel Antonio Noriega. After attempting to rig the elections of May 1989 and then being exposed for his already notorious treachery, he and his faction nullified the results of that election. On October 3rd, several of Noriega's officers staged a coup attempt that failed, and the person Noriega called responsible for that attempt turned up dead shortly thereafter. There are reports of a doctor that spoke out against Noriega and his regime being tortured to death. The purpose of the torture, not to gain information, strictly for the sadistic pleasure of Noriega and several of his high-ranking officers. Then Noriega declared himself the de facto ruler of Panama. In order to provide a more complete picture of the recent events, we leave the rest of Noriega's sordid past to the textbooks and begin our dateline on Saturday, December 16th, 1989.
My wife and I went out to dinner last night at a restaurant downtown called La Cascada. And on our way back, we took a wrong turn, wound up going the wrong way, asked some directions from some kids, and got back on track. But the track they sent us on went in the direction of the Comandancia. We got stopped at a roadblock fairly near the Comandancia and detained. They took our IDs and asked us questions about what we were doing. While we were at the roadblock, we witnessed we had pulled off to the side. We witnessed a car pull up and try to go through the roadblock after the PDF had stopped them also. And when the car, after they had done some questioning, the car pulled through and was fired on by about 5 PDF members.
They made threatening moves toward us, tried to get us to exit our vehicle, locked and loaded as soon as we stopped. The situation appeared to be deteriorating, and that we were in fear of something worse happening than had already happened. When we were able, we fled the area. As we started to flee, the PDF opened fire from 2 different directions, from the rear and from the left, Comandancia building. And one of the rounds that entered the car struck one of the service members and mortally wounded him. As we were driving away, we, after getting our bearings, we went directly to Gorgas Hospital and took him to the hospital, and he was declared dead a few minutes later. And the doctor further elaborated that there was nothing they could do because he bled to death en route. They never once asked for ID. nor told us why we'd been stopped, or at any point it looked like they were attempting to detain us. Okay, it was not a cop type atmosphere at all. It was armed military the whole way, at least from my perception of what I could see out there. As I said, we stopped the car and the guy immediately locked and loaded, and at that point, the being detained question was kind of a moot point.
To fully understand the import of these events and that interview, we must also consider the fate of the eyewitness and his wife, who were being detained by the PDF forces when they saw Lieutenant Paz and the 3 others in the car fired upon.
My first real hostile confrontation was about an hour later.
What exactly did the PDF do to each of you and your wife?
With my wife, they threatened her mostly with sexual abuse, and they would touch her. They didn't really get too bad, but they would insinuate that they were going to touch her in other places and rub up against her and things like that. But she was basically not molested or harassed, other than she did receive a cut to her forehead when she was shoved against a wall. For myself, they did a number of things. They kicked me in the groin probably 15 to 20 times, hit me in the stomach a number of times, and hit me in across the side of the head a few times, beat on my feet with a hammer and my head with a hammer, and did this number on the ears repeatedly until they were bruised.
What threats did they make against you?
They threatened repeatedly to ask me if I wanted to die. They threatened to kill me, and that was basically it. Or they didn't really threaten on beating. They just did it. They weren't talking about it too much. They had us blindfolded, so you could never tell when the next blow was coming.
From the White House, the initial reaction was one of words, deploring the actions of the PDF and attributing the ultimate responsibility to Noriega. From here, some said a battle of words was all that would come of it. But it became evident late Monday evening, the 19th of December, that Capitol Hill was not sitting on its hands. As early as 10 o'clock the evening of the 19th, reports began filling stateside television screens with news of large amounts of U.S. troops moving out to some unknown location, and many more preparing to go. By the time the last of the first wave of the U.S. forces arrived, the Christmas season in Panama already more closely resembled the 4th of July. At least 2 city blocks of Chorrillo, the area surrounding Noriega's commandancia, were ablaze. In other areas of Panama, PDF facilities were either under fire or had already fallen. The fighting and flames would continue well into the daylight hours.
Fellow citizens, last night I ordered U.S. military forces to Panama. No president takes such action lightly. This morning, I want to tell you what I did and why I did it. For nearly 2 years, the United States, the nations of Latin America and the Caribbean have worked together to resolve the crisis in Panama. The goals of the United States have been to safeguard the lives of Americans, to defend democracy in Panama, to combat drug trafficking, and to protect the integrity of the Panama Canal Treaty. Many attempts have been made to resolve this crisis through diplomacy and negotiations. All were rejected by the dictator of Panama, General Manuel Noriega, an indicted drug trafficker. Last Friday, Noriega declared his military dictatorship to be in a state of war with the United States and publicly threatened the lives of Americans in Panama. The very next day, forces under his command shot and killed an unarmed American serviceman, wounded another, arrested and brutally beat a third American serviceman, and then brutally interrogated his wife, threatening her with sexual abuse. That was enough. General Noriega's reckless threats and attacks upon Americans in Panama created an imminent danger to the 35,000 American citizens in Panama. As president, I have no higher obligation than to safeguard the lives of American citizens. And that is why I directed our armed forces to protect the lives of American citizens in Panama and to bring General Noriega to justice in the United States.
By Wednesday morning, the 22nd of December, the major portion of the fighting seemed to be over. The press pool had been well established at the media center on Quarry Heights, and the military was providing transportation into the streets of Panama for the journalists. Although all seemed well, that was not entirely the case. In the early afternoon, a mortar round shook the press at Quarry Heights, even though the actual target was nearly a mile away.
Automatic weapons fire from the pro-Noriega forces and occasional mortar rounds. At the transportation depot at the foot of the hill, just down from the U.S. Military Command headquarters there, you can hear aircraft overhead, but as has been pointed out before, there's always some reluctance to call in air strikes, partly because there is a fairly populated area right around this place. The transportation depot guarded by U.S. infantrymen.
This is Dave Martin watching this videotape with you. As you watch it, if this is taking place at the foot of the hill from Quarry Heights, I mean, this is right next to the U.S. Command Center for all the forces in Panama, and you can begin to get an idea why the estimate is now that it's going to take 5 to 10 days to regain control just of Panama City, if this is what's happening just on the outskirts of the major U.S. command post there.
Aside from a few other isolated incidents of sniper fire and relatively peaceful takeovers of PDF and Noriega outposts, the fighting was over by Wednesday evening. However, one major objective of the U.S. government remained unattained. Where was Noriega? Each day, as U.S. forces pursued Noriega through his flight, more evidence was uncovered revealing the nature of the man.
I personally found, I won't say who it's from, but I'll just say it was from I can't remember the official title, but it's one of his consulate chiefs from one of his Panamanian embassies in another country that sent him in an official envelope stamped confidential on it, and it had the seal and everything, and all it was inside was hardcore pornography. That's all it was. And a letter saying, enjoy the good times, and with all the seditious ones, give them the stick. That was written in Spanish.
His excesses ran the gamut, from lavish living to sexual perversion. It's reported that during his flight, rather than calling his wife, he called one of his allegedly numerous mistresses. Large amounts of cash were discovered in each of his hideaways, including his quarters in the PDF barracks at Fort Amador, his small but pleasant house atop Flamenco Island, and his incredibly extravagant house in the country. His tendencies ranged from the perverse to the bizarre. A house on the causeway of Fort Amador where Noriega employed Brazilian witches to protect him through strange rituals and apparent offerings to unknown gods. Also found in that house, a bucket of blood and a refrigerator allegedly full of entrails. That refrigerator was also the reported location of a large quantity of cocaine, either for Noriega's personal use or for sale. At Flamenco Island, a training ground for his elite forces, the UESAT or USAT, was found an incredible cache of alcohol and weapons, two factors common to every location Noriega frequented. The latter of those factors, weapons, seemed to be of particular interest to Noriega and his forces. To date, 3 to 4 times the amount of weapons recovered from the Grenada invasion have been found here in PDF installations. That equates to nearly 76,000 weapons. In addition to that, there's the Weapons for Cash program, which offers civilians money for turning in weapons they've recovered or found in the streets. That may not sound like it has much of an impact, but to date, the U.S. forces have recovered 4,865 weapons at a cost of nearly $500,000. Why Noriega was stockpiling such an enormous cache of weapons, far more than his forces could have conceivably used in a conflict, is as yet unknown. It wasn't until late Saturday afternoon, the day of Christmas Eve, that reports began flooding in as to Noriega's whereabouts. Unconfirmed reports that he had stumbled alone into the papal nuncia.
A few minutes ago, we received a report that Mr. Noriega had presented himself at the papal nunciariate and turned himself in for political asylum. Now you know all I know.
The United States Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney visited Panama, arriving Christmas Eve and staying through Christmas Day. At a press conference in the early afternoon of Christmas Day, Secretary Cheney gave his views on the political standoff Noriega had created.
Well, we had our hands full in carrying out our basic mission to neutralize the PDF, to safeguard American lives, and to wrap up the operation as quickly as possible and in order to avoid casualties to the maximum extent possible. You could not come in and surround literally every embassy in Panama in the hopes that you would head off Mr. Noriega. He is obviously wanted on criminal charges. He's a drug smuggler, an indicted drug smuggler at this point, or drug trafficker. It's clear that his current posture, having taken sanctuary, is not an act, a political act, if you will. In my opinion, he's a common criminal. Whether or not, how that's all going to ultimately get resolved, I simply don't know. My responsibilities lie with the United States Defense Department and our military forces, and when you get into this area, you're dealing with complicated legal and diplomatic questions that have to be handled through a different channel.
The political standoff remains intact. While the people of Panama want Noriega brought to justice, he continues to cower behind the sanctity of the Vatican Embassy. U.S. troops stand guard. We find ourselves in the aftermath. With the policing force in Panama removed, looting ran rampant in the streets. U.S. forces were helpless to stop it, short of killing all the looters. The scale of the crime was simply too large, and the U.S. forces were still subject to sniper fire, as well as having their mission of urban clearing to accomplish. While U.S. forces are busy keeping the peace, the new government of Panama is wasting no time creating a new policing and defense force. Former members of the PDF that have no outstanding negative history and are willing to pledge their allegiance to the new government of Panama continue to be processed and sworn into the new Panama Security Force, which is already participating in joint patrols with the United States forces.
We've seen the steps taken so far with President Endara's new government. One objective has been to try to get the Panamanians to take over the patrolling and security of their country. One way this has been implemented is by setting up the new Panamanian Security Force. Captain Connolly, Bravo Company commander for the 5th of the 87th, explains the purpose of the joint patrols that began this past week.
Joint patrols, what we're trying to do is get the trust and faith and the confidence of the Panamanian people in the sections back to the hands of Panama. These are people that are loyal to the country. They have been deemed to be faithful to the country. So we got them back out with us, going through, talking to the people, introducing themselves, and looking for looters and common thieves that need to be arrested.
Squads are sent out in groups of usually 4 or 5, with a minimum of 2 Panamanians in each squad. Captain Connolly added that the citizens have been very cooperative in dealing with the military, which has made Bravo Company's job much easier. Physical searches of buildings have not been necessary because the people have been so willing to provide information on secret arms storage facilities, hiding places of snipers, and locations of common thieves. With the continuation of joint patrols, a common goal for both the Panamanian security forces and the Americans patrolling the streets downtown is gaining the trust back of the Panamanian people. For SCN News, I'm Air Force Sergeant Colin Graham.
At the time of this report, Panama is a relatively stable country at the birth of a new government. A government duly elected. A government that will soon take over the operation of its own canal. A government and a people supported by the money that belongs to them and was returned to them after being held in safekeeping for them by the United States. A government that was given the ability to assume its rightful place through the recent actions of U.S. forces. The Panamanian people in the streets are glad for the new opportunity they've been given.
Well, I feel pretty good because it helped Panama's situation. And a lot of Panamanians feel very, not bad, they feel good about it, you know. And American is, you know, helping out a lot of poor people in Panama, so they're glad about it. That's all I got to say.
You don't know me, but I'm your brother. I was raised in living hell. You don't know my kind anymore.
miseria. Hambre y miseria, nada más.
I said that the communism only leaves misery and everything that is bad. I mean, he said that communism. He said that communism doesn't represent anything good for humanity, just misery.
What do you think of the U.S. coming into Panama?
We should have done a long time. Way too long.
Excellent. But I think that the American came 20 years late because they have to come 20 years before Torrijos. I'm very happy. I was expecting this. I'm glad that they are here, and I hope they come here to stay here for a long time.
Everybody feel good, very proud of it because they will have a lot of protection and they, you know, they feel safe completely. They think it's a new life coming back, you know, because when it was Noriega, they were feeling like, you know, everything was down. Now they feel a new life is coming up, you know, a lot of jobs, a lot of money, free life. We don't want to work, it's just because they don't want to. They feel like now the U.S. coming to Panama, they feel there's a lot of freedom in Panama, so that's it.
With the smoke cleared and the fighting over, we look on a freshly written page of history. The ink, the blood of 23 U.S. servicemen killed in action and over 300 wounded. The page, the streets of Panama. The pen, democracy, wielded by the hand of fate. When the United States leaves Panama to itself in the year 2000, it can do so with the knowledge that it has lived up to the letter and spirit of the Panama Canal Treaty, as well as those of the United States Constitution.
Anytime.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Good morning, Give me